Good evening, YouTube friends and family. Hope everyone's doing well. Doing today's video or tonight's video from the sleeper. I guess technically I'm on sleeper status. I'm supposed to be out here, right? Anyways, yeah, I just walked back over from the truck stop. I don't normally eat truck stop food. I try and avoid it. And today I'm running really low on supplies. I haven't made it by a Walmart. Normally I buy more groceries, but if you've heard like a funny clicking, tapping sound, my cooler's been failing. The fan on the heat exchange side is going out, and I'm glad I brought that up. That reminds me, I need to walk back into the truck stop and see if they got one in stock. It's just a fan, and you can replace it in 20 minutes. But I guess I'm gonna walk back over there in a minute. Anyway, so tonight's video is kind of a quick, brief, that's an oxymoron with me, right? Because I'm long-winded. Kind of a brief description of what type of truck. A couple people have asked, how do I like the Mack? And I keep doing that product placement thing, hoping that one day Mack will reach out and say, hey, you got so many viewers. You're giving us this free advertising. We're going to give you a 2021. It doesn't even have to be a 2022. I'll take a 2021. If they got a leftover 2020, I'll take that too. And I'll cruise it around and tell you guys all about it. Anyway, so someone asked me how I like the Mack product, and then someone else asked for some advice on how to spec trucks, or how to pick the right spec is the better way to put that. And so it's complicated. It really is. The first truck that I was ever involved with in terms of speccing, I was a company driver, and my boss kind of really valued my opinion. And this was back in like 93, and we spec'd out a 94 brand new FLD 120 day cab. Had a Cat 3406E. I want to say it was a 5EK motor with 475 horse and 1850 foot-pounds of torque. 13-speed heavy-duty tranny, 377 gears on 11R22 fives. And see, so I still remember it. 185-inch wheelbase, and we did a split tank on one side for a hydraulic wet kit. I still remember the truck. Anyway, so getting the spec right for your application is huge, especially for over the road. When I first told people I was going to take some of my oil field trucks over the road, the first thing they said is, oh, fuel mileage is going to eat you alive. My particular trucks, I'm really fortunate. So I've got three 30 gear ratios on low pro 22s. And some would say, well, that's not a good ratio for oil field, and it's not. I had an old, whose truck was it? It wasn't Halliburton, it was one of the other major oil companies. I had bought one of their trucks. I knew it had a whole lot of idle time on it, but we can in-frame motors, no big deal. And so I bought this day cab. Actually, it had a small sleeper. It had a 36-inch coffin and small engine. It had the 12.7 Series 60, 430 horse with an LL8 and 530 gear ratios. And so this thing would struggle to go over 62 miles an hour, but it was a beast in the oil field. You would put this thing in compound low, and you could literally shift 4 times. You could shift 4 times before you even got faster than walking speed. So when I had other trucks getting stuck, this thing was perfect to drag them out. Would be horrible putting it on the road. So with my Mack trucks and the 330 gear ratios, the reason this works out so well is I've got 13 speeds in them with double overdrives. So your final drive is an overdrive, and then you split that, and the splitter is an overdrive. And so that brings my effective gear ratio, if you were comparing it to like a 10-speed with a direct drive final, it would be like if it had a 280 gear ratio. But I still have a compound low that is lower than a typical first gear in a regular straight 10. So I kind of have the best of both worlds. I have a really low, and my double overdrive still lets me, if I'm cruising 55 through California, I'm doing like 11 and a quarter RPM. So 1125 RPM at 55. And then at like 1350, I'm doing like 68 miles an hour. And then on the rare occasion I do 75, I'm at 1400 RPM. And that's like the fastest cruise RPM you want, is 1400. And so that's going to be my first recommendation. So go look at the truck you like, take it for a test drive, and whatever your cruise speed is, whatever you think you're going to be cruising at, you need to make that decision kind of before you buy. So I honestly believe 70s, like anything over 70s burning a lot more fuel, and it's not worth it. At least with older trucks. Some of the newer trucks now, they got different technology with the compound turbos and everything, and I'm not even going to get into that. But so you really want your RPM to be between 13 and 1400, no more than 14. You need to be careful with that. I'll get to that. So when you go to pick out a truck, you need to figure out exactly which engine it has. Don't just pop the hood and say, hey, this thing has an ISX 15 and it's a 575 horse motor. They've got different variances of them. And so they have 3 different variants. They have like an industrial version, which is, used for like automatic transmissions, not automatics like the manual automatic or the automated automatic, like an actual Allison hydraulic automatic transmission. And then they also put them like in mixer trucks and stuff like that, where you need extremely flat torque curves at a really low RPM, but you're not planning on running high RPM. And so that's their industrial motor. They use them in gen sets and stuff like that too, but they do put them in trucks for the right application. And then you've got the economy series, which typically runs a slightly smaller turbo, which makes it boost quicker. It runs healthier at low RPMs, but it doesn't quite make as much horsepower and torque. You can make one or the other, but not both, like you can in what they call the performance series. So the performance series will give you 2,050 foot-pounds of torque, and you can get over 600 horse. I think 625 is the max. So the performance series has a different manifold, a different head, and a slightly larger turbo. That turbo doesn't develop very good boost at lower RPM. So if you try to run a performance series ISX at 12 to 1300 RPM, it's not going to be happy. The turbo is going to get hot. It's going to be lugging. It's going to actually be less fuel efficient. And so what you're going to need to do is, when you find your truck, you need to get the engine serial number off of it, find out which engine family it comes from, then figure out exactly which performance profile you have. And the sweet spot for diesel engines come just past the torque peak, but now it's not a peak, it's like a plateau. Your torque curves are really flat. So you want to be really short into that peak, but you don't want to be anywhere near where the peak starts to drop and the horsepower is taking over. Then you're burning a whole bunch of fuel to do the same thing, and you're wasting money. For most engines, the happy place is around 1300 RPM. Some of your performance engines don't like that low number. They want to be closer to 1400. So you need to figure out which one you have and get out on the highway and run it up to 14, 1300, find what speed you get out of the truck at that RPM, and make sure your gear ratios aren't so wonky that to get to the speed you want to run. So for example, if you're going to be running out of, San Antonio and Dallas, and you're going to be heading West Coast, well, you've got a section there where the speed limit's 80. How fast are you going to want to run? Most tires are only speed rated for 75, some are rated for 70, so you probably don't want to do 80, but you're definitely going to want to be close to 70. Otherwise, getting across Texas, it'll take you a lifetime. I don't like running much over 70. In fact, I typically have my cruise control set at 68. That's this truck's sweet spot. That's where it's most fuel efficient. That's the key to making money in this business. It's not about how much money you can make. We can talk about getting $4 or $5 a mile, and we can talk about that till we're blue in the face, but it does us no good if you're spending $3 a mile, on truck expense. It does you no good. So the key to making money is to keeping the money. So a fuel efficient truck is key. Buying a truck that used to belong to a mega carrier does help, because obviously the mega carriers, they've spent a lot of money and time figuring out how to get these specifications correct. The drawback to mega carriers is a lot of them are switching over to automated transmissions. Stay away from them. My kid brother's a tech over at Peterbilt. He used to be my service manager at my shop, but things got slow, so he had to go find something else. And he says when certain things fail in these things, Eaton doesn't even try and get you to troubleshoot it. They just say, put it in a crate, send it back. That's fine and dandy when your truck's under warranty. What's going to happen when it's got several 100,000 miles, it's not under warranty, and you're sitting at a TA truck stop and no one understands them? No one's going to learn how to work on these things because Eaton keeps saying bring them back. So stay away from the automated stuff. Me personally, I like 13 speeds. It's easier to keep your truck in the power band. It's easier to keep it fuel efficient, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So some ideas. If we're gonna, the Mack product. Let me get that out of the way. How do I like the Mack product? I bought the Mack product because we primarily were doing oil field. Nothing beats a Mack out in the oil field in terms of the chassis and the cab holding together and not falling apart, where you're literally, zip tying and tech screwing, and you're just trying to keep the thing together. I had a few Freightliner Columbias that literally we ended up with a bunch of screws and some 2x4s. I know it sounds stupid. 2x4s behind the dash, ended up screwing the dash back together because you just couldn't keep them together. Literally, they were in pieces. These Macks, everything's intact, even after they've been in the oil field a couple years. They're very solid. Probably the weakest point in these Mack trucks are the Volvo engine. It is a D13 Volvo engine that they painted maroon, changed the valve cover on it, and it says Mack MP8 instead of Volvo D13. And so the weakness in that motor, the biggest one is injector cups. They put brass injector cups, and apparently over time they separate from the injector. The injector seals against the surface without an O-ring or anything like that. It just sits on that surface, and over time the two separate. So you start getting compression into the coolant, you start getting fuel into the oil. Those are the two major symptoms. So if all of a sudden your truck starts making oil, injector cups. If all of a sudden your truck starts blowing the coolant out of the degas bottle, injector cups. They cost like $2,500 for the kit with the new retrofit or update their stainless steel injector cups. And I hear some Volvo dealerships do them for like just over 3,000 bucks installed. That's a pretty good deal to install all 6, because you have to take the rack apart to get at it. And once they've replaced all your injectors, and no, they don't need to pull the head off. They got a tool that takes the other one out and drops the new one in. I forget what they call it. I think it's just called an injector tool. But we have one for Detroit, so it doesn't fit this. Anyway, so the other upside is, you're going to get your rack adjusted also. So your valve adjustment will be done. You'll have new injectors, and the thing will run silky smooth. Anyway, so the only drawback to the Mack is that, if anything, I might say they're a little bit on the plain Jane side. If you compare it to its corporate cousin Volvo, the Volvo has a lot more creature comforts and amenities. If you compare it to like a Kenworth or a Peterbilt, they're just nicer trucks in terms of little details, right? Mack is more of a work truck, a vocational truck. The ones I have came from a leasing company, so they spec them all the same, and they were pretty plain Jane. For me, them being spec the same is ideal, because everything's identical. I can pull a seat out of one, put it into the next. I can pull an engine out of one, put it in the next. They're all identical. In fact, I own 16 of these, and 12 of them have sequential VIN numbers. I'm in 15700, and we own 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, like through 012 or something like that. And that was just the luck of the draw, but it's ideal because they're identical. Interior colors, fabrics, parts, axles, everything's identical, and that's advantageous for us. Anyway, so that's the Mack. I'm happy with it. If I were to buy another truck for over the road and it was going to be exclusively over the road, I would probably buy something in a high-rise sleeper instead of a mid-rise. These are mid-rise, which means I only have like one cabinet here or shelf, and then another one on the other side. When you get a mid-rise, you get more cabinet space, plus you get typically the fold-down bed. If you don't get the fold-down bed, then along the back wall you get yet another cabinet. And so storage space is an advantage, plus the top of the sleeper lines up with the top of your trailer you're towing. And so if you don't get a high-rise or a double bunk, and you get yourself a mid-rise, make sure you find one that has the fairing that's going to match that. That'll save you about a mile a gallon. So the next thing is, I would opt for one of the aerodynamic trucks. I know everybody likes the hood trucks. Believe me, I like them too. I own a few, and I think they're beautiful, but you sacrifice on mileage. You sacrifice quite a bit on mileage. Even if you get the gear ratios correct, that's going to hurt you. And so gear ratios, that's a key component. A lot of companies are going to 10 speeds. So when you go shopping, you're probably going to find for every 110 speeds, you might find one 13 speed. That's the other reason why I like these trucks, because they have 13s. And so you're probably going to end up in a 10 speed. And most likely your 10 speed is not going to be an overdrive. It's going to be a direct drive. So your 10th gear is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. But then what they do is they put like a 280 gear ratio rear end. And then typically they'll have either a low pro 22 or a super single 22. The super single 22 will save you less than 1 mile per gallon. Every time you have a blowout, you're going to lose all that savings for a few reasons. One, you blow the tire out, even if you're empty, you can't move. That wheel's going to be on the ground. If you're loaded, you're probably going to ruin the wheel, and it's going to be over $1,000 to fix. You got to buy the new tire, and you're going to have to buy the wheel if you were loaded and you rolled on it. It's going to be out of round. It's just the way it is. So I'd stay away from those. 22, 22.5 low pros. I believe they're 295, 75, 22.5 is what they're called. I would go with just the 12 ply. I'm sorry, the 14 ply. Unless you're going to be running super heavy, the 14 ply is plenty. If you're going to be doing Amazon loads, 14 ply is more than enough. I would, on the steer tires, go with 16 ply. You can't have a strong enough steer tire. You don't want it blowing out. That'll put you in a ditch. The reason you don't want to do the heavier duty tire on the rear, it's extra weight that you don't need to carry. It's going to burn more fuel, and it's going to cost you more, and it's going to ride a little rougher. You may not notice the difference, but they're stiffer. There's an additional 2 plies in there. When it comes to engines, every manufacturer has an ugly baby. Okay, so there isn't like the, oh, just get yourself this. Okay, a lot of people are cat fans. Acerts were bad. Basically, the last generation of cats where cat was trying to put the particulate filter and the EGR and everything else, they were problematic. If you're going to get a cat, get yourself an older one, a 6NZ. If you can find a 6NZ that's been converted to a single turbo, even better. Either that or go a little bit older and get a 5EK, a WS2 is also a good one. Thing to keep in mind with cat is their power kicks in a little higher in the RPM, and cat makes power with fuel. There's no other way around it. Cat makes power with fuel. You're going to burn more fuel. Me personally, I wouldn't buy a cat unless I was doing heavy haul. For hauling these Amazon loads, if I'm going to do a pre-emissions motor with Amazon loads, I would do either a Detroit Series 60, a DDAC 4, pre-EGR. You don't want the EGR, you don't want any of that other stuff. Don't get a DDAC 2. Their valve guides were ceramic and they had problems with them. The DDAC 4s had that all corrected. They're cheap, they're easy to maintain, they're cheap to overhaul, they're fuel efficient. They're a little down on power compared to some of the other manufacturers. If you rebuild them and you spice them up a little bit, I've seen some really, really strong Detroit Series 60s, 12.7s, but the reality is you don't need that much power if you're doing Amazon load. If you can find a 470 horse Series 60 with a 13 speed, you got way more than enough power to haul, these 10 and 12,000 pound loads. Another really strong runner that's not as fuel efficient as the Detroit, but extremely durable, well maintained. You can get $1.2 million, $1.3 million before you do an in-frame, would be an N14 with the red top. Those are outstanding little motors. If you find a Select Plus with the red top and it's rated like 430, that's perfect. Not that the bigger engines, or not bigger, but it's not that the higher horsepower rating makes them a bad engine, but it's just making the engine work a little harder, and it's going to mean you're probably going to have to do an in-frame sooner. So if you get yourself a 430, 435, even a 400 even, that's plenty of power to move these Amazon loads. You don't need more than that. There's other decent engines out there, but I think those would be like the better choices if you're going to go pre-emissions. If you're going to do emission, I'd stay away from the newest offerings in Freightliners, the turbo compounded motors. I hear they're having troubles with them. The emission motors are just harder to pick from, but every manufacturer has good and bad. With that, you're going to have to just research by engine family. Detroit's had some bad ones. International definitely has bad ones. Stay away from the Max Force 13. Those are just problematic. Lots of head issues, overheating issues, stuff like that. Personally, I'm not a fan of the ProStar. They're too plasticky. A lot of things break on them. I'd spend a little more money and get like a Packard brand, either the KW or the Peterbilt. There's nothing wrong with the Freightliner Cascadia. Some of the engines could be a little bit of an issue, but there's nothing. I mean, the truck itself for over the road isn't bad. For oil field, they're just a little too soft. Volvos are kind of a mixed bag. They got the Volvo engine, which I kind of told you guys some of their issues. I have friends that own Volvos and they haven't had issues with them, but on some of the forums I read that they have electrical gremlins. I couldn't tell you because I don't own any. And so let's see, we talked about aerodynamics, we talked about matching the height of the trailer. Don't always try to opt for the highest horsepower rating. So if you're, for example, interested in a Cat, let's say you're going to get yourself a Cat 3406E. They made those as high as 600 horse with 2,000 foot-pounds of torque. The higher horsepower rating, when it came from the factory, typically meant that the people that spec'd it needed that power and planned on using it. And so odds are the person was always in the hills, always had their foot in it, and that's why they paid for the extra power. They wore out sooner. In fact, in '93, when we ordered that FLD 120, we went with the 435 horse motor because Caterpillar would warrant the motor for 500,000 miles. At 500,000 miles, you would take it to them. They would charge you $2,500 to do the rods and mains, and they would extend the warranty another 500,000 miles. So you could get a 1,000,000-mile warranty out of the 425 horse motor. If you went and bought the same engine at 500 horse or higher, they wouldn't do that program. That's telling, right? And so statistics show that on flat level ground, a modern day engine only needs about 170 horse to move 80,000 pounds on flat level ground. That's all fine and dandy for when you're on flat level ground. Eventually we climb, we go through grades. Statistics show that over the road trucks spend less than 5% of the time in the hills, so you don't need to gear and power yourself for the hills. Honestly, you know, these Amazon loads pull like you're running an empty truck anyways. So getting yourself something in the 400s, in fact, an M11 with a 380 horse rating, if you get that with the 13 speed, that'll do that job all day long. And if you don't plan on going cross country and, you know, up into the northwest where you're going to be up in that, you know, Washington and Oregon hills, if you're going to be running, you know, from Atlanta to San Antonio, then up to Dallas, across to Memphis, and then back down to Atlanta, little M10 will do that all day long and save you a bunch of money on fuel. It'll wear out a little faster because it's a smaller engine doing a bigger job, but not as bad as you might think, because your Amazon loads typically 5,000 to 15,000 pounds in payload is all you're hauling. And so less than 50,000 pounds on any given day. Anyway, that's kind of my input on how I would buy another truck. If I could have my pick today, right now, what would I pick? I'm not going to say money was no option, but if I was looking today, I would probably look for one of the either Peterbilt or Kenworth aerodynamic cabs with the high-rise sleeper. Doesn't necessarily have to be a double bunk. In fact, if it's not a double bunk, it'll probably have lower miles, because a double bunk typically means team operation, putting 1,000 miles a day on the truck. With the 13 speed, and like 330 gears and full fairing. 11R 22, I'm sorry, 295 70 22.5 on the tires. Closed shoulders, don't need open shoulder for any reason. Preferably all aluminum. The all aluminum helps save weight. That's probably how I would spec one. Hard to find them really clean. I didn't say the motor. I'd probably do a Cummins ISX 435, 450 horse. Cummins came out with a thing not too long ago. You can take any of their ISX 15 and turn them up torque-wise. Maybe not horsepower, but you can turn the torque up. Torque is what moves you down the highway. Torque is what defines how big a load you can do. And so for a few $100, swing by an authorized Cummins dealer and have them turn the torque up at least to 1850. If you can get 2050 out of it, that might be more fuel than you need to burn anyways. I think 1850 is more than enough. And if you got 435 horse, 1850 foot-pounds of torque, a 13 speed with a double overdrive and 330 gears, you'll have a beautiful machine. There are a couple Cummins that had some issues, and there are some retrofits that need to be done. And so that's something you may want to research on the forum. Which series of engine had the fuel pump issue? Make sure you avoid those, or if you get yourself one, make sure the fuel pump has been replaced. There's an update that Cummins has. Anyway, hope this helps. By the way, I threw in a little shifting clip in the beginning. Apparently amongst trucking YouTubers, if you can't shift, you're all talk, no action. So I guess I threw that in there. That's clutchless, by the way. I don't use the clutch. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a good evening. I'm gonna get a little rest. I got a lot of miles to travel tomorrow. I hope I make it to Texas. Have a good night, guys.